Hi, everybody. Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the garden, my happy place to talk about scary things. In tonight's episode, we have feminism, good or bad, featuring Tammy Peterson's podcast.
Welcome to my podcast today.
She is, you may or may not know, the wife of Canadian firebrand Jordan Peterson. But the real point of interest here is her guest, Professor Janice Fiamengo.
And you believe then that actually, you might not say it in that manner, in fact, feminists deny it, but you would believe that a kind of revenge, a collective process of group vengeance is perfectly justified.
Who had some very interesting things to say about whether feminism is good or bad.
I do think it's so important to study the history of feminism.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I wish more people felt that way.
Because I so often hear people say that feminism began with good intentions and it was a legitimate movement. Women had legitimate grievances.
I can already tell from your tone that you're implying women don't have legitimate grievances, and I would beg to differ.
Feminism in its early days was a sane, rational appeal for women to have equal rights with men, and that it went wrong at some later stage. And I hear that so often, and I believed it myself until I really started looking critically at the texts and the major leaders of the early feminist movement. And I discovered that no, it was never without deep rancor and bitterness against men.
Yeah, that would be regarding those legitimate grievances I mentioned.
It was never free from the claim that women were absolutely innocent victims of male predation. It was never uninterested in destroying the family. It was never inaccurate in its claims about women's social situation. And it was never fully willing to slander men in the most vicious and unpitying ways.
It was never willing to slander men. I love how she got so wrapped up in what she's trying to say, she got completely mixed up in her double negative diatribe there.
And it never expressed any appreciation for men or any recognition that men had ever made any contribution to society.
Men have always done a very good job of speaking for themselves.
It was just, it was always a really deeply misandric, man-hating, man-blaming kind of movement. And I think that it's really important to know that.
Feminism has problems. No shit. Why are you using this to try and discredit it in general? No bad or petty behavior on the part of anyone cancels out the fact that women need a philosophy which speaks for us. Complaining about the struggle in accomplishing this is like saying you don't run your fastest because you were running uphill. Who is surprised that we are easily winded?
And my contention is that all the seeds of what we see now in the crazy, irrational, completely hysterical denunciations coming out of the mouths of feminist activists, all of that was there in the early movement.
Yeah, and I would say that the worst possible germs of that early movement were cherry-picked and nourished by all the right people. Like, you're not wrong, but that doesn't mean women's philosophy is a bad idea.
So, we could go back to around 1850, as you say. Like, some people would even say there were feminist discussions even earlier. You can go back to, I just did a video on feminist foremother Mary Wollstonecraft. She was a British writer and philosopher and activist, and she wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. That was published in 1792. And it was already the blaming of men.
This is where I'm going to point out that blaming men for everything is a form of internalized misogyny. They don't get to take credit for everything, not even all the bad stuff.
Always the crediting of men with the worst possible motivations in the laws they enacted or in their behaviors. Always this utopian idea that if only women were free and given a lot of power, that the entire world would improve.
So far, so good on that one. I mean, would you like to go back in time 150 years? I'm just saying.
That revolutionary spirit, that utopianism, that has a deep role in a great deal of feminist ideology that was developed at that time and later. The idea that we can change human nature by changing our society.
Enacting policies to encourage women to participate in culture and wider society is changing human nature. Interesting.
And the rejection that there is anything fundamental in human nature, the rejection of the idea that anything we've developed over time, it has been developed because it worked, to some degree, which is the conservative kind of view, I guess.
Conservatives certainly do not get to take credit for any kind of common sense.
That the society that's passed down to us should be at least respected, even if we want to change things in it. But the utopian mindset that we often find in feminism and in other forms of progressivism completely rejects that. And we see that very clearly in Wollstonecraft.
I think that might be just a feature of Enlightenment thinking, but it's not black and white. Wanting to get rid of everything is an extreme straw woman.
She was a British woman?
She was a British woman, yes.
She was a British woman.
Just as a goofy aside for a second, I honestly didn't know that this was Jordan Peterson's wife. When I first looked at her, I did not know who this woman was. But now that I know that, is it just me? Or does she sound just like him?
She couldn't see the idea of having children, being married, being fulfilling without a career. Is that accurate to what she was thinking way back then?
Yes. She made a kind of double-edged and self-contradictory argument.
It's not self-contradictory. In her day, private social networks that were built around the raising of children existed.
In the sense that she agreed, actually, as many later feminists did not, she agreed that women's primary role in society would be as as wives, companions, helpmates, and mothers. She agreed.
I doubt that Mary Wollstonecraft ever used the term helpmeet.
But her argument, which sounded quite conventional, was that for women to be the best wives and mothers they could be, they deserved to be far more fully educated than they were, and they deserve to have professional opportunities to bring their talents into the public sphere, to do whatever.
Well, that sounds good.
And that sounds good.
And Wollstonecraft's argument is so logical that it's been enacted all over the world. The trouble is that educated women start to get other ideas about how to spend their time.
I know that there's research that if women are educated, their children do better.
And that was the argument that she made.
That's right. Educating women improves society as a whole.
Women
Good
are
argument.
Which may be the best argument for feminism that there is.
If women are to be moral, virtuous citizens, and if they are to bring up their children to be good citizens, they should be well educated. And so that sounds great. I don't have, of course, any any disagreement with that. But she did not seriously consider the tension that would arise between women's, what she said was their particular role.
Particular, not mandatory.
As mothers, to bring children into the world and to help them, nurture them, create a home for their husbands and families. And the other challenges, the other kinds of tension and stress and everything else that come from a public role.
Maybe she didn't acknowledge that tension because she could not foresee it. Because to women in her day, a lot of this stuff was just a fantasy. You can't dismiss her for not having properly thought through all of the practical implications for something that had yet to be fully put into practice.
She even made the argument that that women would be more loving, more contented in their domestic roles, more genuinely attached to their husbands and children when they were given greater freedoms and greater opportunities and more power in the society. Now, she never really philosophically defended that position.
Maybe she never philosophically defended that because it looked obvious to her. Why wouldn't you be happier when given more options and allowed to become a more well-rounded person?
Why would someone become more attached to the home when all of a sudden all of these other opportunities are granted?
And that's just admitting how limiting and dull that shit can really be, isn't it? Thanks, Janice. So this has been part 1 of our little visit with Tammy and Janice. Come back on Friday for the second half where things just continue to spiral. Come back today at the top of the hour for the live stream where we can giggle at these girlies a little more, and I will see y'all next time. Okay, thanks. Bye.